This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Fables. This is a subscription-based monthly episodic adventure series that is now heading into its third episode, with the fourth episode just on the horizon.
Fables has had a lot of amazing writers contribute to the project in a lot of the episodes that we've seen released, including yours truly, which have written the final episode, which is yet to be revealed.
Fables is a complete campaign told in 6 episodes, with each episode debuting once per month over the next several months.
We did get to contribute to the final chapter of this campaign and design the dungeon that you get to play through. So if you are excited to jump into this campaign and see more of what Monty and I have created for grim, dark campaign settings, get ready, because we're pretty proud of some of the great elements we got to throw into that dungeon. So if you want to get your hands on the first 3 episodes and the upcoming 4th episode, make sure to check the links below to grab your copy today. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel, where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
The ground shakes beneath the earth as a titan strides forward, a monster from a primeval age, the Tarrasque. Today, we are talking about how to run it in D&D 5e.
The Tarrasque has been an iconic monster of Dungeons & Dragons for a very long time. It's both a terrifying monster and a natural force to be reckoned with that can destroy entire cities, crumble buildings, send earthquakes rippling through the ground. A lot of people go their whole careers never fighting a Tarrasque, but most of us always want to.
The Tarrasque has almost always been one of the highest challenge rating monsters in the monster manual of every edition of D&D that has been featured in. Usually it's pitted as that huge aspirational boss monster that looks really difficult to beat on paper, but often many people realize, oh, actually, if you do this combination, you can cheese it out and beat the Tarrasque just like that.
We mentioned the Tarrasque in our Worst Legendary Monsters video, but today we're going to talk about how to actually make this a really cool and compelling monster. We're going to talk about some of the role-playing options that we might use for our Tarrasque, as well as battlefield tactics, variations, and adventures inspired by the Tarrasque.
There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
When we get into the inspiration for our Tarrasque, how we might roleplay them, one of the first things that pops into my head is the image of the kaiju. It kind of makes me want to have the party form a Voltron to fight it, so that we can do the Pacific Rim style battle here. I think it's so cool, but yeah, the Tarrasque is definitely that kaiju type creature. Even
though the Tarrasque represents a gargantuan creature, I think for me so much, I imagine the Tarrasque as being just insanely large. We're talking like something like Godzilla or the Cloverfield monster. Something that is huge, that steps on houses and buildings and knocks over entire castles with a single sweep of its arm.
And I think if you are a fan of those monster movies like Godzilla and Cloverfield, those can be great inspirations for how not only to play your Tarrasque, but already we're talking about adventures inspired by it, because you could literally take a Godzilla or the Cloverfield movie and use that as the premise for what your Tarrasque is up to.
I also think one of the cool things about emphasizing the size of the creature and the scale of it is, for me, it really draws on a lot of that inspiration from video games like Shadow of the Colossus, or even shows like Attack on Titan, where the heroes actually are climbing up the back of the beast, because a monster that large, you can't stab it with a sword, you can't shoot it with a crossbow. It's just too big to actually be damaged by human-sized weapons of any kind. And so the way you fight these creatures is by climbing on them and finding their weak points, if you want to even fight them at all, and even if it's possible.
Now, what's really interesting about a Tarrasque is that a lot of people just stop there with the role-playing. It's a giant monster, it's attacking the town, but we really want to beg the question, why? And what is the Tarrasque doing? I think that even when you're bringing a Tarrasque to the battlefield, coming up with a great motive, a great reason for it to be attacking, these elements are going to really bring to life the story and the themes of your campaign and why the Tarrasque is there.
The Tarrasque is like a force of nature or a natural disaster. It shapes the world around it from its very movement. emphasize to your player characters just how it leaves massive footprints in the ground with every step. Stone crumbles and cracks, and the thunder of every single one of its movements echoes across the horizon. It unleashes a deafening roar, and the drool and sweat that comes out of its mouth is like rain falling down all around it. It should feel like a walking hurricane.
Really, the Tarrasque is a big, spiny dinosaur, but when we're getting into our description of it, we can do so much more. Think of these kaiju-like creatures, the alien nature, the monstrous features. Maybe even borrow from Godzilla or Cloverfield or Attack on Titan or Shadow of the Colossus or God of War. And you can really take this any way you want with the description. It doesn't have to be the image in the book. It might look much more alien in nature or much more beast-like. It might look like a certain type of beast. Could be a giant lumbering hairless bear. I don't know if you've ever seen what a hairless bear looks like, but I saw an image of it once online and it is terrifying. They're way scarier and less cuddly when they don't have hair. And imagining my Tarrasque is sort of that bestial form, lumbering forward rather than a dinosaur, you can really go so many ways, but be explicit with your descriptions.
Often the Tarrasque is depicted as reptilian or with an ossified carapace around it. But you could also imagine something that's rather insectoid, too. Your Tarrasque doesn't have to look like the one in the book, and one of the ways to make it special is to really focus on what the creature looks like.
There's no reason why Godzilla versus Mothra can't actually be two Tarrasques fighting.
Yes, indeed. Just give one a fly speed. In addition to its physical description, one of the ways that we can roleplay the Tarrasque is thinking about its personality, because so often in these disaster monster movies, the monster actually does have a bunch of flaws, and it does have a personality. And in many cases, the way the protagonists overcome that creature is by thinking about what its primeval nature is. Is it angry? Is it hungry? Is it protecting its young? Is it attracted by a certain sound, smell, or color? Or does one of those things enrage it in a certain way or drive it off?
In this way, you can use the Tarrasque in a campaign where the Tarrasque isn't necessarily the BBEG of the campaign, but perhaps a plot put in motion by a character to bring the Tarrasque to destroy a city, using a sound, using a color, using some sort of system that draws the Tarrasque to it. Or even, maybe a group of wizards have stolen a Tarrasque egg to study it, and now you have the Tarrasque marching on the city. But deciding what the motive of your Tarrasque is means that the characters get to learn about that and possibly use it to defeat it. A Tarrasque for me is much more interesting when there is alternative ways to beat it other than just hitting it with a bunch of arrows while running away. You might really want to think about ways that the party might be able to calm down or subdue the Tarrasque. Perhaps grabbing the egg and delivering it back to the Tarrasque kind of calms its wrath, and it sees the adventuring party as doing it a favor. There might be some really compelling options in there for ways that the party can work to help the Tarrasque.
Maybe you could draw inspiration from the Pied Piper, and a specific song actually attracts the Tarrasque to a certain location. And you could even go further with this, that playing the song backwards drives it off. Fun stuff like this is a way of making the creature more than just a mindless brute that is destroying things, and it creates a built-in puzzle. Having these extra role-playing traits and flaws on the Tarrasque is really, really important, because as we get into the combat tactics of the Tarrasque, there's really not much there. And if you're pitting the Tarrasque up against a group of 20th level player characters, it's really, really challenging to just make that pitched battle interesting. You need to add some other element or a threat to the situation in order to really make the Tarrasque come to life.
So as we move into our combat tactics, let's look at the Tarrasque's stat block. It is a challenge rating 30 creature with almost 700 hit points and an AC of 25. It's immune to non-magical damage, it's immune to a bunch of conditions, and it has an ability to reflect spell attacks, making it a little harder to hit unless you are high level.
The Tarrasque also has a 30 strength and a 30 constitution, and it's also been given proficiency in mental ability saving throws, which as a challenge rating 30 monster, it actually has something like a +9 proficiency bonus. So even though it has a massive intelligence penalty, it has a bonus to its intelligence saving throws, combined with magic resistance, as well as legendary resistance. So it's got some pretty impressive defenses combined with its huge AC and hit points. And it also has 5 attacks. It deals like an average of 120 damage in a round. It also has legendary actions to attack even more. But its speed is only 40 feet. It has no ranged attacks. And it has no way of flying.
And that's why it's important to know when to use a Tarrasque. I think for DMs who are trying to implement this into their games, if you have a 20th level party and you're like, I'll pick the Tarrasque because it's challenge rating 30, your 20th level party might sweep the floor with the Tarrasque.
They are going to absolutely mop the floor with it. The Tarrasque is, unfortunately, despite its size, there's a lot of spells that simply it has no answer to. All the party needs to do is cast the fly spell on the entire party, and as long as they have at least one character that can make weapon attacks that are magical, then that's it, right? The Tarrasque can move as one of its legendary actions, so it can turn that 40-foot movement speed into 160 feet of movement in a single turn if it wants to. But it's never going to get you in the sky. So I think one of the most compelling ways to actually use the Tarrasque is to lean into that natural disaster element and put the Tarrasque up against a way lower level party that has absolutely no hope of actually going toe-to-toe with it, and asking them, okay, how are you going to survive?
I think that the important tactic with a Tarrasque is that the Tarrasque should always be threatening something. The player character's home base, their home city, a castle that they're trying to defend. When they see the Tarrasque coming towards a location that is important to them, that puts a time crunch on the combat encounter. If you are playing this against a really low-level party, now you have almost an entire adventure where the Tarrasque is coming, it's heading towards the important town, and this low-level party needs to figure out how they're going to calm the beast, probably not fight it. If you have a mid-level party, they might need to fight it, but you still have all of these compelling options.
Even simply for a low-level party, their encounter with the Tarrasque might not be a direct combat, but rather the attempt to evacuate a city that's being attacked by the Tarrasque, rescue as many people as possible, simply get by it or get away from it. These are all really excellent ways to use it in low-level play, especially when you have characters that really cannot actually hurt it. Whether we're going to use it for high-level play or low-level play, I think that this is where modifying the Tarrasque's stats becomes really important, because I think that the flip side of this is that if you put the Tarrasque up against, say, a 5th level party whose goal isn't to kill it, but to survive, well, even a single claw attack from the Tarrasque could kill them outright. And with its ability to use its legendary actions to move that 160 feet, it's actually really hard for low-level characters to run away from it.
And I think that's why, as a DM, we do need to be careful. If we are presenting the Tarrasque as a impending doom to a town or village, and the party's goal is to evacuate or save as many people as possible, you probably don't even need the Tarrasque to pay attention to the little creatures scurrying about. It sees the town and it just starts swatting buildings and castles over, killing people in the process. But even if the party is flinging their crossbow bolts and firing arrows and slinging spells, the Tarrasque doesn't notice them.
Well, and this is where one of the first modifications to the Tarrasque I think really need to come into play. I think that what the Tarrasque needs in the core of its stat block is some sort of ability that implies the Tarrasque just knocked over this building and now you need to make a dexterity saving throw to dodge the rubble or take damage. And that kind of ability is one that you can scale with the player characters by changing the saving throw DC and changing the damage, so that if you're using that ability against a low-level party, maybe it's only 46 points of bludgeoning damage with a low saving throw to avoid it. Against a higher level party, it's even more. Alternatively, the Tarrasque can also have an action to pick up a rock from the rubble of the building that it destroyed and hurl that rock. That ability alone just addresses the it doesn't have a ranged attack problem and makes complete sense for the creature. You can even imagine that it's not even intentionally picking it up, that literally what it's doing is punting the rock or backhanding it, because it doesn't actually pick it up, it just has that force behind its blows.
Very simply, you could take the Stone Giant's rock throw ability, tack it onto the Tarrasque, and just use that. If we are presenting the Tarrasque to a low-level party, we may want to altogether remove its legendary actions. Perhaps the Tarrasque is sleepy and is just waking up, so it's a little sluggish. Use your best judgment here, but a low-level party doesn't necessarily need the major threat of legendary actions. If the Tarrasque is running through smashing buildings and they're trying to escape, there's already enough going on for them to deal with.
I might also consider reducing the number of attacks it can make as its multi-attack if I was using the Tarrasque in an encounter with lower level players. Again, this is probably where I would just say the Tarrasque's only action against a party that is tier 1 or early tier 2 in level is just the knock over a building action and then use the d6s of damage, like 3d6 or 4d6 against a saving throw, rather than it actually having like that massive fist attack against the hapless fighter. That's not fair. I would also either remove the Frightful Presence, although I kind of want that still there. I would just vastly lower the DC.
I think that you could look at maybe the appropriately leveled dragon equivalent and see what their Frightful Presence lands at and try to tack that on. But yeah, lowering the DC still gives your players a chance to be terrified of it, but more reasonably.
Yeah, just making this suite of changes, if you're using the Tarrasque as that set piece, maybe even the inciting incident of your campaign. I think that's a great idea of like session 1 of your campaign, put down the massive Tarrasque, escape, survive. And that's a great way to open a campaign with a bang. Escape a city being destroyed by the Tarrasque. But make these changes so that you're just not going to outright TPK in session 1.
Now, mid-level play is fair game. We can use the Tarrasque almost as is, but as we move into the higher level play, where again, a high-level party could easily kill a Tarrasque. So what are some options that we can use to really enhance what the Tarrasque can do and round it out so that it's a threat to all types of characters? And I think my first option here is when I think of Godzilla. The coolest thing about Godzilla is you think you're fighting a dinosaur, which is already scary enough, until it opens its mouth and suddenly a beam of energy fires out and blasts through a bunch of buildings. If we give the Tarrasque the ability to open its mouth and cast either lightning bolt, prismatic spray, or disintegrate out of its mouth as an action, this is a really cool way to deal with those flying targets, ranged combatants, or other people that the Tarrasque can't quite catch.
The way that I would actually word this ability is that I would put whatever spell you give the Tarrasque on a recharge of 5/6 and allow it to use that, if available, as part of its multi-attack routine. So it can still do all of its attacks and then also breathe out a prismatic spray. Feels appropriate for a challenge rating 30 monster. I think that the rock throwing action is also essential, giving maybe even the ability to toss 2. Again, this is for the high level party. But one way to also enhance the environmental feeling is just have the Tarrasque constantly emanating the aura of an earthquake spell.
Yeah, I think the Earthquake spell really suits the Tarrasque, and as it's stomping around, the Earthquake spell just takes effect. Perhaps if you want to, you could make that also a recharge ability, but I think just having it happen naturally when the Tarrasque shows up, Earthquake is cast because, hey, there's a Tarrasque, that seems okay.
The other high-level change that we can make here is by looking back to previous versions of the Tarrasque. In D&D 3rd edition and earlier, the Tarrasque had a really unique feature. It could only be killed by reducing it to 0 hit points and then using a wish spell to keep it dead. I love that, and I just think that should be a thing. I think that should just be a thing with the Tarrasque. I was actually really disappointed when I looked at my 5th edition monster manual and that wasn't there, because I thought that was so cool. I also think that just giving the Tarrasque a straight up crazy regeneration value, especially to make it a really cool challenge of having your party have to deal several hundred points of damage in one turn and then cap it off with a wish, that just feels like a cool game-ending combo move.
You could also make it an iconic endgame boss by making it immune to all damage except those caused by specific artifacts or an incredibly rare material. So the characters actually need to seek out this legendary blade or this certain spell or this very specific material that they're going to build their weapons out of in order to fight the Tarrasque finally.
I would also just add a couple things to the Tarrasque in general, especially if you're going up against high-level play. First of all, I would say the Tarrasque is dimensionally anchored. You can't plane shift it, you can't teleport it, you can't banish it. All of those things just feel totally wrong to ever work on the Tarrasque. Just give it immunity to those things, in my opinion. I also think that the Tarrasque should have the ability to destroy walls of force and force cages with its claws. There's no way to contain it or stop it. It's an engine of destruction. We want spells to still work in certain cases, but the ones that would just end the encounter, like the cheese ball ways of ending it by just trapping it in a force cage. It's too big to fit in a force cage. Trapping it in a wall of force. It's too big for that. Trapping it in prismatic sphere. It's too big for that. You gotta be able to have something more creative than that to defeat the Tarrasque. One disclaimer, if you are souping the Tarrasque up for high-level play, just be cognizant of what the capabilities of your player characters are. If you want to make it immune to a bunch of stuff, but in the process, it means that the party wizard actually has no way to contribute, that's kind of the stopping point. So it is going to be the climactic battle of your campaign, so you want to make it resistant to many of the things that your party can do, but at the same time, you still want to give options for the player characters to participate. And this is where the items and other artifacts that they might have to seek out and use and make those things that the players have to use in an active way. Perhaps even there is a specific spell that the players might invent or cast or create, like Wish or something else, that is necessary to defeating the Tarrasque.
And I think as we move into looking at adventure ideas, there's already a lot that we've said that can inspire entire adventures. I think, again, starting your campaign off with the Tarrasque showing up is a great way to start an adventure where now the entire adventure might be about the player characters figuring out how they're going to stop the rampage. It's hit the first town in maybe the Elser Vale, where you have a string of all of these cities. It's only a matter of days before the entire string of cities is destroyed. What are the player characters going to do? Maybe if we include the option where, hey, they need a very specific weapon, or some evil NPC has stolen the Tarrasque egg and the characters need to get it back and return it to the Tarrasque before it destroys every city. These are some iconic ways that you can bring the Tarrasque in early and have the campaign be about it.
I think the Tarrasque as a singular monster is amazing at almost any point in the campaign. You can have it wake up at the beginning of the campaign to set off the action. You can have it wake up in the middle of the campaign to really represent that turning point of the campaign as the situation gets worse. Or you could have it wake up at the climax of your campaign as part of the final boss. There could be nothing more climactic than facing both the ancient evil spellcasting lich that has now awoken the Tarrasque. And while a lich and a Tarrasque straight out of the monster manual might not be that impressive, the two of them together at the same time is scary.
I really like the idea of the Tarrasque being the result of magic, whether that's an evil NPC summoning it into existence to destroy its enemies, or even a well-mannered wizard who was just trying to help accidentally created the Tarrasque and now needs to hire a group of adventurers to help him solve this horrible problem that he has created. There's a lot of really cool ways that you can go with thinking about the magical origins of a Tarrasque. And along the lines of magic and the Tarrasque, perhaps parts of the Tarrasque, maybe its blood or the eyeball of a Tarrasque or whatever you want, are needed for an important magical concoction. Perhaps your campaign or adventure is not actually about the Tarrasque, but the Tarrasque is needed. You need to collect a vial of blood from a Tarrasque in order to create this potion that will save the kingdom.
You could go even further with that, and that the player characters have to wake the Tarrasque up, because rather than fighting it, maybe a gate to the Far Realm has appeared, and it is indestructible unless you're the Tarrasque. And so the player characters need to deliberately summon the Tarrasque in order to use it to overcome some even greater threat. On the flip side, the Tarrasque can be totally played straight as the Ender of Worlds. It could simply be that the Tarrasque is tied to a prophecy of the end of the world, and it emerges periodically throughout history at times when it could be the apocalypse. Will this generation of heroes drive it off and have it back to sleep for 1,000 years? Or is it time actually for the world to end? So ultimately, the Tarrasque is a creature that is far more than just a stat block with stupidly high numbers that is used as a thought experiment. It is a great adventure hook that can be used at almost any level of play, whether as a core element of your campaign or a surprise in the third act. No matter how you decide to use the Tarrasque in your campaign, focusing on some of these ideas will help it be more than just a stat block and make the way you use it in your game worthy of the legends themselves.
So this has been a look at how to run a Tarrasque in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've used a Tarrasque in your games, tell us about how that went in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube and want to join our Patreon Discord community, follow the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play Fate of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more guides for game masters for running D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.